You're just a badge-carrying busybody who couldn't cut it in the private sector. My father said those words to me on the marble steps of the Willard Hotel, right in front of the doorman and half of Washington's defense industry elite. He was holding a glass of champagne and smiling like a man who had already won. Go home, sweetheart. The adults are celebrating tonight. 2 weeks later, I walked into Dirksen 106, the Senate Armed Services Committee hearing room, and every camera in Washington turned to face me. But before I tell you what the committee chairman said when he called my name into that microphone, and before I tell you how that night truly ended for my father and my brother, I need to take you back to where this all started, a family party that was supposed to be a celebration. The chandelier in the Willard's banquet hall was the size of a small car, and it turned everything below it into a kind of theater. My father had rented the entire East Ballroom for the occasion, $340 million in new Department of Defense contracts, his largest single award in 30 years of running Ashford Defense Solutions. Half the room was lobbyists. The other half was current or former military brass, the kind that rotates smoothly from 4-star rank into 7-figure consulting arrangements, open bars, a string quartet, and the unmistakable smell of old money and new ambition. I had driven up from the DCIS field office in Virginia in my government sedan. I still had my federal credentials clipped to my jacket because I'd come straight from work. The security contractor at the entrance, one of my father's hired people, looked at my badge, looked at me, and then looked back at his clipboard with an expression that told me everything before he said a word. I see a +1 slot for your mother's seat, he said carefully. Not your name specifically, ma'am. I told him to check again. He checked again. My name wasn't on the list. I pulled out my phone and called my mother. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and distant the way it always was when she was performing for other people. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, and I could hear the string quartet behind her and the low murmur of important conversations. "Your father thought it might be better if you came next time. Tonight is more of a business evening." A business evening. I had driven 40 minutes in rush hour traffic on I-395 to stand outside my own family's party while my brother was inside toasting a contract I had every legal reason to care about professionally. That stung in the particular, precise way that only a lifetime of this kind of treatment can perfect. Not like a slap, but like a door you've been told is open your whole life, and you keep walking into it anyway. I hung up and started walking back to the parking garage. That was when my father came outside. He had a fresh glass of champagne and the comfortable posture of a man who had rehearsed this moment. My brother was 2 steps behind him, jacket perfectly tailored, expression carrying the particular satisfaction of someone who has just watched someone else be put in their place. My sister-in-law was on my brother's arm, wearing diamonds at her ears and a look of very deliberate pity on her face. "You got the message," my father said. It wasn't a question. "I got the message," I said. He tilted his head, studying me the way he studied things he considered beneath his investment of attention. "You know your real problem? You've spent 15 years building a career out of going through other people's paperwork. You're just a badge-carrying busybody who couldn't cut it in the private sector." He smiled when he said it, comfortable and practiced. "Go home, sweetheart. The adults are celebrating tonight." My sister-in-law laughed, a soft, controlled laugh designed to land without leaving a visible mark. "We could add you to the guest list as staff," she offered, her voice carrying the particular polish of someone who had spent years erasing wherever she'd actually grown up. "I'm sure your little federal ID gets you through most service entrances." My brother swirled his drink. "She makes $65,000 a year investigating people who actually build things for this country," he said, shaking his head slowly, like he was describing a sad but predictable outcome. "I spent more than that on this watch." He tilted his wrist so the chandelier light caught the dial. I recognized the case shape. He'd shown it to me at Christmas 2 years ago and explained, with complete seriousness, that it would appreciate in value faster than my government retirement account. I stood very still on those marble steps and let them finish. I had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous thing I could do in any room was show them what I actually knew. My pulse was steady, my hands were loose at my sides. I was thinking, without quite meaning to, about a set of procurement documents I'd pulled 3 days earlier that I hadn't yet connected to anything important. I was starting to connect them now. "You're making a decision tonight that you won't be able to walk back," I said. My voice came out flat and even, which is how I've trained myself to speak when I most need to be heard. My father laughed. My brother shook his head like I'd said something charmingly naive. My sister-in-law was already turning to go back inside, bored. "Good night," my father said. I walked back to my car. I sat in the parking garage for 4 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on my dashboard, and then I drove back to the office. I hadn't planned to work late that night. The Ashford contract file had been sitting in my queue for routine review. Routine, that's what I'd called it. But something my brother had said the previous Christmas kept circling. The new armor line had passed independent testing ahead of schedule. At the time, I'd thought nothing of it. Contractors brag. That's their job. I pulled the file at 9:47 p.m. The Ashford Defense Solutions contract, $340 million, sole source award tactical body armor for 3 forward deployed Army units, had passed all required NIJ level IV ballistic testing at a certified independent lab in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The test reports were signed, dated, submitted to DoD acquisition on time. Clean paperwork. The kind of clean paperwork that gets a contract fast-tracked through approval. I know what clean paperwork looks like. I also know what clean paperwork looks like when someone has worked very hard to make it appear that way. I ran the lab certification number through our verification system. The lab was real. It had certified other products legitimately. But when I cross-referenced the specific test dates listed on Ashford's reports against the lab's own submitted schedule, which contractors are required to provide separately, the dates didn't align. The lab had been running residential insulation testing in a completely different facility on the exact day Ashford's body armor was supposedly being shot at with rifle rounds. I sat back. Then I ran the material batch numbers against the DoD supply chain database. The ceramic strike faceplates identified in the documentation had been sourced from a supplier in Guangdong province. That supplier had been flagged 18 months earlier for delivering substandard materials to a different contractor, materials that tested at roughly 60% of the rated protection level. 60%. I want you to understand what that number means in practice. It means a soldier wearing that armor in the field, taking a round the vest was certified to stop, has a 40% chance of that round going through anyway. The vest becomes theater. The paperwork stays clean. The casualty reports come later, after the contract money is already spent. I pressed both palms flat against my desk and stayed very still. Then I opened the metadata on the test report documents. There are things embedded in digital files that people forget about. User IDs, editing history. The original reports had been generated by a third-party document production company. 3 pages, however, had been modified after initial submission. The modification timestamp was 11:23 p.m. on a Tuesday. The user ID attached to that modification logged into our secure acquisition portal. My credentials, my government login, my digital signature on the revision trail. Someone had accessed the federal system using my information and quietly amended 3 pages of fraudulent test reports. If anyone ever looked, if anything ever went wrong in the field and an investigation started, the paper trail would lead directly to a federal investigator whose name and credentials were already embedded in the documents. It would lead to me. I picked up my desk phone, set it back down, and gave myself exactly 30 seconds to think through what came next. Then I picked it up again and called the FBI's Public Corruption and Government Fraud Unit. If you feel the weight of what I just described, hit that like button right now and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Don't go anywhere, because what I found in the next 48 hours changed everything I thought I understood about my own family. The FBI sent 2 agents to my office the following morning. I gave them everything. The metadata discrepancies, the batch numbers, the lab schedule conflict, the supplier flag from 18 months prior. Within 48 hours, they had a warrant for Ashford Defense Solutions internal communications. Within 72 hours, they had the rest. My brother had been exchanging encrypted messages through a private server with the document production company. The instructions were specific and written plainly. Use the authentication credentials they would provide, modify the designated pages, ensure the revision history showed only one set of changes. The credentials they provided were mine. My brother had obtained them through a contact inside a government IT support contractor, someone he had cultivated apparently for exactly this kind of moment. There was more. The FBI pulled a video file from a private cloud account registered to a shell company my father controlled. The footage was shot in what looked like a hotel conference room, poor lighting, slightly shaky framing. My father and my brother were seated across from 2 men I didn't recognize. One of the men was speaking in a low, cautious voice. What if the DCIS traces the batch numbers back to the Guangdong supplier? That's your weakest point in the chain. My father leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed, the same posture he'd had on the steps of the Willard Hotel with a champagne glass in his hand. She won't, he said. She's too far down the food chain and too fixated on her own metrics to see the larger picture. He paused, and then he smiled in the quiet, satisfied way of someone who has already accounted for every variable. And if she somehow does, we have a contingency. There's already a federal credential embedded in the document trail that ties every modification directly to her. She's been in that office long enough that everyone knows she carries a grudge against our company. A conflict of interest narrative practically writes itself. My brother nodded slowly. He was also smiling. She's useful either way, he said. I watched that video file twice. The second time I watched it, I was very careful to keep my breathing even and my hands still on the desk. Then I closed my laptop, put on my coat, and walked for a long time along the mall in the cold. The monuments were lit from below against a dark sky. I walked until the part of me that wanted to feel something about this finished doing that, and then I went back inside and got to work. The following 10 days were the most focused of my career. The FBI case was comprehensive by day 8. The DOJ was ready to move. The only question was where and when we executed. I sat across a conference table at FBI headquarters with the lead prosecutor, a methodical woman who spoke in complete sentences and chose each word like she was submitting it as evidence, and laid out the options. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "The Senate Armed Services Committee has a hearing scheduled for Thursday. Your father's lobbyist set it up 3 months ago. The committee was going to formally commend the Ashford contract as a model of expedited acquisition." I looked at her. "He's expecting applause," she said. I thought about the marble steps of the Willard. I thought about the word contingency, spoken in my father's easy, comfortable voice, and my name right after it. "Then let's give him his moment," I said, "and then let's end it." Dirksen Senate Office Building, Room 106, seats approximately 200 people in the gallery. On the Thursday in question, it was standing room only. Television cameras, radio feeds, trade press from every major defense industry publication in Washington. My father and my brother had arrived early and taken seats in the front row of the gallery, dressed for an occasion they expected to be celebrated at. My sister-in-law sat beside my brother in a cream-colored dress. My mother was at the end of the row, posture precise, expression arranged carefully into the look of a woman accustomed to being publicly admired. I entered through a staff door on the side of the room. I was not in civilian clothes. I was in my DCIS duty uniform. Navy blue, federal insignia on the shoulder, credentials visible, 17 years of service in the commendations on my chest. My boots were polished to a mirror finish. My posture was the posture of someone who had not slept more than 4 hours a night for 10 days and had not questioned it once. I took my seat at the witness table, facing the elevated dais. I did not turn around to look at the gallery. Committee Chairman Aldrich settled into the center seat, adjusted his reading glasses, and looked out over the room with the calm authority of a man who had been informed exactly what was about to happen and had chosen deliberately to let it unfold in full public view. "We'll come to order," he said. The room went silent immediately. This hearing was originally called to review the Ashford Defense Solutions contract award as a model procurement. As of this morning, the scope has been substantially revised. He looked directly at the witness table. "I recognize the lead investigator from the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. Please state your name and role for the record." I leaned toward the microphone. "Special Agent in charge of Government Contractor Fraud Investigations, Defense Criminal Investigative Service, Department of Defense Office of Inspector General." The silence in the room changed texture. From the gallery directly behind me, I heard the sound of a man shifting suddenly in his seat. "The committee has reviewed your complete evidentiary package," Chairman Aldrich said, "and has voted unanimously to accept it into the congressional record. You may proceed." I pressed the remote in my hand. The screens lit up behind me. I had built the presentation the way I've built every case of my career: lead with what cannot be disputed, then let everything else follow from there. The falsified test reports, the batch numbers and the supplier flag, the encrypted message chain, the metadata from the modified acquisition files, and then the hotel conference room video, my father's voice, easy and comfortable, using the word contingency and my name in consecutive sentences. The room came apart. A senator at the far end of the dais was on his feet. 2 others were leaning hard into their microphones. The cameras pivoted. In the gallery, I heard my mother make a sound that wasn't a word, just a sound, the kind your body makes when the floor drops out beneath what you thought was solid ground. "I am submitting a formal criminal referral," I said, my voice level through the microphone, "on charges including major fraud against the United States, falsification of federal procurement records, and conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation." I paused for exactly 1 beat. "I am also requesting the immediate suspension of all active Ashford Defense Solutions contracts pending full audit, and the urgent recall of all body armor units currently deployed in theater under this contract. Those soldiers in the field need to know what they are wearing right now." Chairman Aldrich looked to his left, exchanged a single nod with the ranking member beside him. "Federal agents," he said, "please proceed." They came through 3 doors at once. 16 FBI agents and DOJ prosecutors, several of whom had been seated in the gallery in civilian clothes for the past 45 minutes. My brother stood up so fast his chair fell backward and hit the person seated behind him. My father grabbed the armrest of his seat as if he could anchor himself to it through sheer grip pressure. My sister-in-law opened her mouth and then seemed to understand in the space of 1 second that there was not a single person in that room positioned to be argued with. Conrad Ashford, the lead agent, said, "You are under arrest for major fraud against the United States government, falsification of federal procurement records, and conspiracy." He had the handcuffs out before he reached the end of the sentence. My brother looked past the agent, past the cameras, across the width of the gallery and the witness table and all of it, directly at me. I don't know exactly what he was looking for, maybe recognition, maybe some signal that underneath everything we were still what we had been before all of this. People who shared a last name and a childhood house and a table at Christmas. I held his gaze until the agent turned him away from the dais, and then I looked back at my documentation on the table in front of me. My father did not resist when they approached him, which surprised me a little. He stood when they asked him to stand. The champagne glass ease was gone entirely, replaced by something very still and very gray. When the agent guided his hands behind his back, he didn't speak. He just looked at the marble floor. My sister-in-law's voice, when it came, was sharp enough to cut. "Our attorneys will." And then the IRS criminal investigation agent beside the FBI agent started speaking, and the words he used were offshore accounts, and immediate asset freeze, and domestic and foreign holdings, and her sentence simply stopped having anywhere to go. My mother sat in her chair long after everyone else had been moved out of the gallery. A female federal agent stood nearby, patient and professional, giving her time. My mother looked at her own hands in her lap. Then she raised her head and found me across the room, still at the witness table, hands folded on top of my files, watching. She said my name, just my name, the same voice that had said, "Your father thought it might be better if you came next time," with a string quartet playing behind it. I looked at her for a moment. "You need to find a very good attorney," I said. "I mean that sincerely." The agent guided her out, and the room began the long, slow process of emptying. 7 months later, on a Tuesday morning in early spring, I drove past the Ashford family estate in McLean, Virginia. The property had been seized through federal asset forfeiture. There was a sign out front, white background, clean black lettering, announcing that the building had been transferred to the Defense Department's Warrior Support Initiative, a residential and transitional program for catastrophically wounded veterans and their immediate families. Volunteers from the program were working in the front garden that morning. I slowed down long enough to see 2 of them, one in a wheelchair, one kneeling in the soil beside them, working on something together. I don't know what they were planting, something that would take time to grow. My brother received a federal sentence of 19 years. Major fraud against the United States, falsification of records, conspiracy. He is serving that sentence at a federal correctional facility in Cumberland, Maryland. His watch was sold at federal auction as part of the asset seizure. It sold for considerably more than my annual salary. I found that clarifying. My father received a 12-year sentence, slightly reduced after he agreed to cooperate with prosecutors on the foreign supplier network. I have not spoken to him since the hearing. I don't intend to change that. My sister-in-law pleaded guilty to conspiracy, received a 5-year sentence reduced to 3 with full compliance. All domestic and offshore accounts were frozen and absorbed into the forfeiture proceedings. She is currently at a federal facility in West Virginia. My mother was not criminally charged, but she was a material witness for the prosecution and lost access to nearly every asset through the forfeiture. She is living in an apartment in Northern Virginia now. I know this through people we both grew up around. I haven't sought her out. That door will stay closed for a while yet. The soldiers in the 3 deployed units received new, independently certified body armor within 11 days of my Senate testimony. The recall operation was the fastest in DCIS institutional history. The agent who coordinated it has been doing this work for 23 years and told me she had never seen a recall executed that quickly. I told her I'd had good motivation. The Ashford Defense Solutions name no longer exists. The company was dissolved, its remaining assets absorbed. The McLean estate, where I had once attended Easter brunches and 4th of July cookouts and 2 Christmases ago, listened to my brother explain the investment value of a watch, now has people inside it who are learning to walk again. I still drive the government sedan. I still badge in at the same field office. Last month I opened a new case file on a different contractor, different product, same basic arithmetic, cut corners on materials, inflate the test results, collect the check, and count on nobody connecting the dots. I connect the dots. That's what I do. That's what I have always done. On the morning of the hearing, I sat in my car in the Dirksen parking garage for a few minutes and thought about my father on those marble steps, his champagne glass, the easy and comfortable way he'd said, "Go home, sweetheart," the way my sister-in-law had offered me a spot on the staff list. I thought about what it cost them in the end. I thought about what it cost me to get there. Then I picked up my credentials, got out of the car, and walked in through the front entrance. That is what dignity looks like, not the kind you buy, the kind you carry. Thank you so much for watching until the very end. If this story stayed with you, please leave a like and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.